Hello guys and welcome back to another important video on technical interview. And today we will be discussing another important question on the low-level designing, and today's problem statement is car rental system like Zoomcar, Rave and so many other platforms. So in our last video we have discussed in detail that how we should do the low-level designing of the flight booking app such as MakeMyTrip or Booking.com. So if you have not gone through that video till yet, I would highly request you to go through that video first and then come back to this video. So without wasting much time, let's start with this video. So as you know, system designing is one of the crucial round for technical interview, where the interviewer will give you a problem statement, and based on the discussion with the interviewer, you have to find a proper solution and design for your system. And since the system designing question is an open-ended question, so it is your responsibility to discuss with your interviewer to know the exact requirement of the system. So let's see first that what can be the requirement for the car renting system. So as I have already told you in my previous video, requirement can be two types. One is the functional requirement and another can be a non-functional requirement. And the functional requirement can include the main functionality or the requirement of the system, whereas the non-functional requirement includes the scalability, maintainability and all these things. So let's start with the functional requirement of a car rental system, and for that I will be taking an example of the Zoomcar. So let's first analyze the website of the Zoomcar so that we can get an idea that what can be the possible functional requirement for our system. So here you can see this is how the Zoomcar application looks like, where a user can come to the application and here based on the location and the provided date, he can select a car from the hundreds of options given over here. And if you see properly, this car can be categorized into different ways, such as based on the number of seats, the car type, the transmission and so on. So there can be a lot of filters which are basically the property of the car, and based on those property a user can actually select the car. Similarly, with each and every car there is a value associated with it which is the rental value, and based on the value he can book the car. So this is the basic UI of the Zoomcar application, and keeping all these things in mind, let's start with our design. And let's first analyze that what can be the functional requirement of our application. So let's first list down all the functional requirement for our application. So the first and the basic requirement for our application should be that once the user comes to our application, he should be able to sign in into our application. So our first requirement should be the user should be able to create an account into our application. And once the user first create their profile or sign in into our application, the first functionality that we should allow him to do is we have to give him a location where he want to book the car. So the user should enter the location from where the user want to book the car. Now once he have given the proper location, we should be able to display the list of cars from our inventory based on the given location. So our third requirement should be our application should be smart enough to list down all the available cars based on the given location. And once the list is in front of the user, then the next step comes is like the user should be able to select a car from that list. So here you can see we have reached until this point. Now what our application should do is like once we click on book now, our user should be able to mention the pickup and the drop location of the car, so that we can confirm his booking and can allocate the corresponding car into his location. So our fifth requirement should be user should fill the booking details like pickup and the drop location, and once he provided all the information, the next functionality that our application should handle is the payment gateway, because obviously without making the payment we cannot proceed further. So our application should be smart enough to support the payment gateway. And once the payment is done, our application should give a confirmation mail or a notification message to the user. So our last and the final functional requirement is like our application should give the notification to the user. Here you can see these are the list of functional requirements we can think of as of now for designing a car rental system. Now let's see what can be the non-functional requirement for our application. So as I've already told you in my last video, the non-functional requirement of an application remains more or less simple, which includes the scalability, means our application should handle a huge amount of traffic. Number 2, maintainability. means our application should be easy to maintain, and number 3, the code should be modular enough so that if any further requirement comes in the future, we should be able to perform that. So these are basically the functional and the non-functional requirement that we can list down for a car rental system. Now since we have jotted down all the requirements for our application, let's start with developing our application and let's start with designing the low level design. So the first thing first, we have to first find out the actors who will be involved in the car rental system. So as it is quite clear, the actor for this application is the customer, means the user, and number 2, the operator who will be uploading the card detail. So here the actors will be customer and operator. So since now we have already identified the actors and the functional requirement for our application, let's now drill down a bit and let's find out the major entity class those are associated with our application. So if you just go through the Zoomcar application, here you can see we can segregate this entire website into few modules which we can call as entity. So here the first entity will be the user, means the person who will be booking the car. So the first entity will be the user. The second property, which will be the major entity for our car booking system, is the car, which will include many properties like the type of car, the name of the car, the amount of kilometer that was driven, and so many things. So the property car will be one of the major entity for our application. Now the next property that can be a major entity is the booking or the reservation, which means that once a user select or book a car, there should be a mapping event which will hold the data related with both the car and the user, so that we can identify that which car have been booked by which user. Now the fourth major entity for this class is the payment gateway, which will handle all the payment for our application. And last but not the least is the notification server, which will notify the user that which car is booked by him with all the details associated with it. So these are basically the major 5 entities that we can think of right now. So there can be many more entities that can be associated with it that we will find out while we will do the low level designing in detail. But as of now, let's list down all the entities that we have found out on the first go. So here you can see for the car rental system, we have found out the functional requirement, the non-functional requirement, the actors, and the major entity associated with that. So since we have now already found out everything, let's start with the implementation of the low level designing for our application. And let's start with the major entity, and that is the car entity. So we will first create a class called as car, which will include all the attributes of the car which is required by the application for the filtration purpose and many more. So let's see what are the major properties or the attribute of the car that we can include within this entity. So the first thing is the name of the car. Second, it can be the brand with which the car is associated. Next, the booking price, followed by the kilometer driven, and many more. So here you can have a list of properties associated with the car, but there are a few more properties that we need to specifically mention. And the first one is the type of the car. So here the type will be another entity for our car application, which will include that whether the type of the car is a SUV, hatchback, or a sedan type. So here we will create an entity called as type. Similarly, like that, we have to include one more property called as status, which will hold the property like whether the car is running or booked or it is vacant, means whether the user have booked the car or not. And based on this property, we can determine the availability of the car. So these are the two main properties that we should have within this car entity. Now let's see, other than this attribute, what can be the major functionality or the functions that we have to mention within this car entity. And the first functionality that we have to mention over here is reserved vehicle, which means that with the help of this functionality, we should change the status of the car from idle to reserved. Means we should able to change the status of the car using this functionality. And the next functionality that we should have is the update car detail. And with the help of this functionality, we should able to update all the properties of the car. For example, the kilometer driven, the booking price, and everything. So these are basically the minimum property that we should have within our car entity system. So now here you can see, while we were designing this car entity, we have seen that we need to further create two more additional entity. One is the type and one is the status. So here the type will be another entity within our application which will be of type enum. And since we have a handful of types within the car application, so we should include the enum type over here. And we will be including this following property like sedan, hatchback and so on. So this becomes one of the entity for us. Let's create the another entity, and that is status, which will also be a enum class and which will include the property like or not operational. Means there can be a time when the car will be in the maintenance and it cannot be booked by the user. So we have to also filter out the car property based on this status type. So this will be another entity for our car booking system. So here you can see this type is dependent over here like this, and here we have the status class which is dependent on this. Now there is one more important property that I missed over here within this car class, and that is the location. Means at what location the car is present right now, and based on that location obviously we should able to list down all the car for our user. So here we will create another class called as location, which will obviously have few of the attributes like the name of the location, the zip code, and maybe the latitude and the longitude of the place, so that we can exactly track the position of the car. So this can be one of the entity for our car. So here you can see how granularly we are subdividing our problem and we are doing a low level designing for our application. So here you can see we have already found out all the major entities we need to mention for describing the entire car property within our application. Now let's see what are the other things that we need to have. So the other part of our application is the user part, where the user will be able to log in into our application and should be able to handle the booking. So first thing first, we will be creating another entity class called the user, which will have some of the basic detail of the user like name, email, PAN card detail, license detail and so on. So let's include those property or attribute within this user class. So these can be the list of details we need to have for a particular user so that he can book a corresponding car. Now let's see what are the additional things that we need to mention over here so that we can perform the successful booking of the car. And to handle this entire booking event, which is the major entity of our application, we will describe a centralized class called as the car reservation system. So let's define a class called as the car reservation, which will include all the major functionality like booking of car, search the car by location and so on. So let's see how we will implement all those things in our low level design. So first thing first, since the car reservation system is the heart of our application, so this class should always include all the information of our cars as well as the user. So here first what we will do, we will include a major property, that is the list of cars we have within our application. Similarly, this car should also have the knowledge of the users who have logged in into our application or who are looking for the car. Another important thing that it should have is the list of the location where our application is up and running. Which means that, for example, we are opening our application, that is the car booking system, only in Bangalore. And if you are a user from Gujarat, obviously you should throw an error that our application or the car rental system is not available on the Gujarat location. So here we should include all the list of location where we are actually operating with this car location system. So here you can see how and why we are including each of these attributes within our application. And you should always remember during the interview that whenever you are adding an attribute into your application or into your entity, you should always explain the interviewer what is your thought process behind that. Means why you want to include that variable over there and what is the business logic that you want to solve based on that property. And in this way, if you can explain the thought process to the interviewer, it will be very easy for the interviewer to identify that you are a good candidate and you have a good design thinking knowledge. So whenever you are giving this type of interview, do not just silently design the application. Rather, you should always interact, and also you should define all the business properties and the functionality that you are trying to solve. So let's proceed further. Here we have seen that in our main functionality, that is the car reservation system, we have the knowledge of the list of car, user and location. Now here we should also include a property which will map list of the user and the list of the car, which means that which car is present at which location. So here we should include a hash map like thing which will include location with the car detail, which means that whenever a user is trying to search the car based on a particular location, it will be easy for you to just scan this hash map and list down all the cars present on that location. So this functionality will actually help you to easily filter out all the cars based on the location parameter. Now since over here we have already included all the major attributes that should be there for our car reservation system, let's also see what are the main functionality that we should include over here. And the first functionality that should be there over here is like get car by location. And within this function, we will be passing the location parameter so that based on this location, we can filter out all the list of the car from this list. So the first functionality over here will be get car by location. Similarly, here will be another functionality like get car by type, where we will be passing the type as our parameter. So here based on the use case that you are defining to the user, all these can be one of the functionality for your application. And in this way you should mention all the functionality that you should include within your low level designing architecture. Now let's see what are the other major functionality that you should include. So the other major two functionality that you should include is the booking of the car, where you will be passing another entity type over here as a parameter, and that is of property reserve. So this will be another one of the entity that we have to define within our application, which we will do a bit later. And now the last one is the confirmation mail. So for that we will be having another functionality defined over here, that is confirmation, which will give a confirmation to the user. So there can be plenty more use case that you can easily think of and you can define it over here. But right now we will stick with the use case that we have described over here. So here you can see based on the use cases what we have defined over, all these things we can achieve based on the low level designing that we have drawn over here. So now let's design the last and the final entity that we have defined, and that is the reserve type. So for that we will be creating another class called as reserve, which will include all the entities related to the booking. For example, the first one is the user, means the user who is booking the car. Next, the property of the car which he have booked. Next, the pickup location from which he have booked the car. Next, the drop location where he have mentioned to drop the car. Then comes the rental price and so on. So there can be a plenty more attribute that you can capture for a particular booking so that it will be helpful for you to send the notification to the user. So I will be capturing all these things right now, and here within this confirmation mail, obviously I have to send all this detail within our confirmation mail. So here you can see we have defined almost all the entity classes and the low level designing which are needed for our car booking application. Now the last and the final requirement that we have to fulfill from this list are this payment gateway and the notification server. So what we will be doing, we will be defining the two more modules, and that is the notification server and the payment gateway. So here the payment and this notification server is itself a huge thing to implement. So we are not going into the detail of this implementation, rather we are just identifying it as a separate module because this is out of scope of our car booking application. So we will skip it as of now. But in my future video, I will be giving a low level designing of this notification system and the payment gateway alone, so that in case your interviewer asks you to elaborate all these things also, you will be comfortable enough to handle that question also. So here you can see we have already listed down and covered all the major entities and the associations that we need for this car booking system. Now let's see what are the actors who will be involved in what level of our application. So here you can see this side of the application, which includes the card details and everything. This part of our application will be handled by the operator of our application. Similarly, this part means the car booking system and everything, this will be handled by the user class. So here you can see at the very beginning we have defined the two major actors for our application, that is the customer and the operator. And based on that mindset only, we have defined the complete architecture of our car rental system. So hopefully you guys have thoroughly understand that how incrementally we have defined the low level designing of our application and how we have identified all the entities and the association and the connection among each other. And in this way only you have to communicate with your interviewer to explain him or her that what are the requirements that you are thinking of and how you are thinking to solve that problem. So hopefully you guys have thoroughly liked this video and you have found this video useful. And if you have liked this video and if you have found this video useful, do not forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you never miss an update from my side and you are always ready for your next interview. So without wasting much time, see you on our next video. Thank you.